Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm from South Hadley, Massachusetts, so it's the middle of the afternoon here. Thank you for early morning and late evening, folks. Well, John Caldigate, which I have learned to call it from asking Dom some time back, not to say my American, which would otherwise probably have been Caldigate. So I say Caldigate. A fairly late novel published in 1878 to 9, originally in Blackwood's magazine, and then published in book form later that same year, 1879. It appears in the chronology that I have, which includes the date of composition, composed between Duke's Children, which we read last year, and Ayala's Angel, which we will be reading either next or the one after that, I think. I love this novel. I have not read it before and I have not gone ahead, but I just thought it was wonderful. And here are only 5 of the many reasons why I loved it so much. First of all, the first 2 chapters both begin with my favorite Trollope word, perhaps. I have taken a habit of underlining and marking up every time Trollope uses the word perhaps, and finding it very, very interesting the way he does that and why. Both of the first 2 chapters begin with the word perhaps. And the entry on John Caldigate in the Oxford Companion to Trollope also begins with the word perhaps, which is either an accident or deliberate. Second, it seems to me to possess what critic James Kincaid calls Trollope's subtlety and radiant good sense in spades, even more than other novels most recently. 3, it is so neatly constructed. 4 chapters at home, 4 chapters on shipboard, 4 chapters in Australia, and then the big surprise or the big withholding that we get in chapter 13. 4, I think the scenes between John and his father are so painful and so sad and so realistic about a father and son unable to communicate with each other, unable to understand each other, as the word Trollope uses over and over again. So well done here and so painful to read. It just seemed like a new direction for him. Number 5, we have Euphemia Smith. Euphemia means well-spoken in Greek, or Madame Chatini. She belongs, I think, with Lizzie Eustace and Lady Ongar and Mabel Grex in Trollope's pantheon of cleverer than the man, objection anticipating, practical young women. So these are only 5 of the reasons why I just really adored this beginning. So I'd like now to take us through these 13 chapters, as is our wont to do, with a brief in which for each one, not including everything in the chapters, and finish with some ideas to send you out into your small groups. So, and again, looking at the chapter titles, which are so wonderful. The first 4 chapters, the 3 of them are named after the place at which they take place. So first we have Folking, which is the home domicile of our hero, in which 2 major characters are introduced, young John Caldigate and his father Daniel. The tensions between them are spelled out. John Caldigate visits his much more pleasant uncle and is trapped into a quasi-engagement in a linen closet in a very funny scene. The first of several oops romantic moments for our hero just in these first 13 chapters. Second, a new setting, Puritan Grange, with an interesting named title, place, in which John Caldigate wins over his father's friend and financial man, Mr. Bolton, and is attracted to Mr. Bolton's daughter, Hester, though they never exchange a word. They only briefly touch hands at the end of the chapter. We are introduced to Hester's mother, who is, I suspect, going to be Chekhov's Puritan lady in future chapters. 3, Daniel Caldigate, the only chapter in these beginnings that's named after a person rather than a place, in which John Caldigate prepares to leave Folking for New South Wales for his new adventure in the gold fields. He begins to feel affection for the old place. father and son continue to misunderstand each other with unspoken love, I think, on both sides. Chapter 4, The Shands, another place in which John visits his partner, Dick Shands, about whom he has some serious suspicions, as well he should, and is astonished at the Rowdy family's casual approach to, well, everything. Mariah Shand, Dick Shand's oldest sister, is the third young lady in 4 chapters to be brought to our hero's attention, which I think may very well be a record. He's a pretty attractive guy, it seems like. Then we move to the shipboard, and we have 4 chapters on the shipboard on this wonderful ship named the Gold Finder. It couldn't be more obvious, in which Trollope spends a lot of time telling us how life aboard ship has its own rules. And even though, in terms of class and culture, even though Dick Shand and John Caldigate are gentlemen, because they have second-class tickets and because they're trying to dress rough, they have the same access to the first class events that they might have if they were in the other class. Dick Shand is the first to notice the woman in the brown straw hat, and he vows to, quote, unravel her mystery. But it is our hero who finds her standing next to him at the dance. She appears almost as if by magic. The next chapter is named after her, Mrs. Smith. She and John Caldigate become closer, and Trollope makes up, I assume he makes up because I couldn't find them, the names of some novels to offer Mrs. Smith to read. Wonderfully named novels. He doesn't go too far in making fun of the novel genre, I think. And there's tension between our 2 heroes over Mrs. Smith, and they quarrel about her in a very, what seems like a realistic way. Well, I'm not going to do this, and I don't care if you, this sort of young man behavior, it seems like. Chapter 7 is called The 3 Attempts, in which 3 people attempt to talk John Caldigate into leaving this woman about whom nobody knows anything alone. We have Dick Shand, we have Mrs. Callender, an older woman in the upper class cabin, and Captain Mundy, all attempting with varying degrees of subtlety and no success at all to warn our hero away from Euphemia, as her first name is, well-spoken, that is. And we have learned in the past that he doesn't like to be told what to do, and he really doesn't like to be told what to do with these folks. And so he's very, very firm and a little bit frightening, at least as far as Mrs. Callender is concerned, and maybe even the captain. They both realize that there's no point going further with him on this subject. Chapter 8, Reaching Melbourne, in which Mrs. Smith adroitly catches our hero, even admitting that. And the 2 of them agree to communicate after a month apart, and he considers them engaged, though he's not happy about that. Shipboard scenes are over with. We move to New South Wales. Chapter 9, Nobble, which is the place in which our young men are dismayed by the dirt and disorder around them, and the scales sort of fall from their eyes pretty early about how romantic this may or may not be, this event. But they meet some very pleasant and generous, if rowdy and pessimistic, workers. I mean, the workers are not willing to say, oh, yes, there's gold to be had there for anybody. Chapter 9, Polyura Hall, in which our young men meet a Mr. Cricket who tries to rope them into buying shares in his mine. And they meet the wonderful Mike Maggot, who's one of my favorite characters. I was sorry to see him not in the story more often. So he's very helpful to them and willing to go with them into the minefield. Halala is the name of their mine area. This is a chapter in which our young men set up their tent and begin to mine. And at one point, after some weeks, Dick Shand and Mike Maggot go on a drunken bender, and Mike Maggot's crestfallen and guilt-stricken and needs to be persuaded with a lot of effort to stay on the job. They find some little tiny pieces of some things that might possibly be gold. Not too optimistic, I think. Chapter 12, it's called Madame Cettini, and of course, reading the title, we have no idea who that is. John Caldigate in this chapter finally writes to Mrs. Smith, trying several forms of what to say, eventually writing that he can't yet offer her a home, but hopes he soon may, which is false. He doesn't hope he may soon offer her a home. He's beginning to regret the entire thing. He hears accidentally that she is a Mademoiselle Cettini who sings, dances, and performs tableaus in Sydney. He decides to go to Sydney, where the ever clever Mrs. Smith anticipates and calmly demolishes all his objections to their reunion. At the end of the chapter, they're preparing to meet the next morning. So you expect the next chapter to be meeting the next morning, but no. Chapter 13, coming back. Look what Trollope does here. Such an unexpected switch. Months and then years go by back in Folking. We hear how they started to make some money, started working with Mr. Trinket. We hear how Mike Maggot died and Dick Shand gave the whole business up and has become a shepherd, and that John Caldigate is coming home for at least a year. No word in the whole chapter of Euphemia Smith or Mademoiselle Cettini. It's as if neither one of them ever existed. So I'm very interested to think about what might possibly be coming next. So I thought what you might do, I have some thoughts about what you might do in your small groups. Of course, you need not. A couple of words that struck out at me about some things that were interesting, that words that repeated, this whole idea about being rough and dressing rough or looking rough. Might want to look at that. There's some of that in chapter 9 and some in chapter 12. Another word that's around a good bit is natural. Again, chapter 11 and 12. My aforementioned perhaps, which are in chapter 1 and 2, among other places. Romance is another word, which Trollope uses in chapter 1 and chapter 4. I think there's a big interest in how you dress and what that says about you, because remember that Euphemia Smith is pretty shabby at the very beginning, sort of ostentatiously shabby almost. And once she sort of has caught John Caldigate, she starts dressing a little bit better. So without Trollope having to say so, it seems like it's part of her arsenal of weapons that she uses. I think looking at the places in this novel, I think this is another thing that's particularly interesting in it, is that there's so many places. 9 place changes I determined in just these 13 chapters. And then last, and Dom, if you put up the quotation, this would be good. So I had a quotation that I thought you might look at if you wanted to. And this is from chapter 12. And this is right at the point where John Caldigate has thought about a couple different things he might say to Euphemia after he's been away from her for more than a month. And he finally says, I can't offer you a home yet, but I hope I can someday soon. And Trollope says, these last words were false. He knew that they were false, but the falseness was not of a nature to cause him to be ashamed. It shames no man to swear that he loves a woman when he has ceased to love her, but it does shame him to drop off from the love which he has promised. So that's what I have for you as an introduction. I hope you enjoy the novel as much as I did, and I hope that you enjoy your conversation. Thank you.